Christmas dinner was supposed to feel warm. That was the lie I told myself while I set my daughter down in the high chair and smoothed the wrinkles out of my sweater like they mattered. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon candles, the kind my mom lit only when guests were around. The dining room glowed with soft yellow lights, garland draped carefully along the banister, everything staged to look like a family that belonged together. I arrived 10 minutes early, like always, because being on time felt like one less thing they could hold against me. I took the seat at the far end of the table, the one closest to the kitchen, half out of the conversation zone. My daughter banged her spoon happily against the tray, oblivious to the tension already crawling under my skin. Around the table, my parents laughed with my older brother and his wife, clinking glasses, talking over one another. Their kids ran circles around the chairs, loud and sticky, but no one flinched. When my daughter dropped her spoon, I bent quickly to pick it up before it could annoy anyone. I smiled when my mom looked my way. It was automatic. A reflex I'd perfected over years. Don't be difficult. Don't draw attention. Don't make things uncomfortable. The conversation floated past me like background noise. Vacation plans I hadn't known about. Inside jokes that didn't include me. Complaints about gas prices, then laughter, then my dad telling a story he'd told 100 times before. Every so often, someone would glance at my daughter and say how cute she was, how much she'd grown, and I'd nod, grateful for scraps of warmth even as my chest tightened. I pushed the turkey around my plate without really eating. My daughter smeared mashed potatoes across her sleeve, and I whispered to her softly, wiping her arm with a napkin, praying she wouldn't start crying. Crying always made my dad tense. Noise made him impatient. I'd learned that young. When my dad finally spoke directly to me, it wasn't with anger. That was the part that would replay in my head later. He leaned back in his chair, fork resting on his plate, and cleared his throat like he was about to comment on the weather. "We've given you enough," he said calmly. The room didn't stop. No dramatic pause. No warning. My brother snorted into his wine. My mom sighed, like this was a conversation she was tired of having. I froze, a napkin clenched in my hand, my daughter chewing happily on the corner of her bib. My dad continued, his voice steady. "Now it's time for you to take responsibility and move on." For a second, my brain refused to process it. I waited for the joke, the clarification, the part where someone laughed and said he didn't mean it like that. But no one did. My brother grinned like he'd just heard something satisfying. My sister-in-law avoided my eyes. My mom didn't look at me at all. The words sat on the table between the serving dishes and the candles, heavy and undeniable. I felt heat rush to my face, then drain away completely. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What do you say when the ground gives way beneath you in the middle of Christmas dinner? My daughter dropped her spoon again, and this time it clattered loudly against the floor. I bent to retrieve it, grateful for the excuse to look away. No one apologized. No one backtracked. They waited. They were waiting for me to agree, to shrink, to thank them for everything they'd done and quietly accept being erased. I stayed silent, staring at the spoon in my hand, my heart pounding so hard it felt like everyone must hear it. I thought about how I'd ended up back in this house a year earlier, exhausted and scared, telling myself it was temporary. I thought about every grocery bill I'd paid, every utility payment, every time I'd skipped buying something for myself so things would be easier for them. I thought about how carefully I'd tried to take up as little space as possible. "We're tired," my dad added, like that explained everything. That was when I understood. This wasn't frustration. It was a verdict. Christmas dinner went on after that. Plates were cleared. Dessert was served. Conversation resumed around me as if nothing significant had happened. I sat there holding my daughter, nodding when spoken to, feeling something inside me go very quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I was already leaving. I stayed seated until dessert plates were cleared and my daughter started rubbing her eyes, her small body finally giving in to the overstimulation of noise and lights. I excused myself softly, like I always did, carrying her upstairs to the spare room we'd been using. I laid her down in the portable crib and watched her chest rise and fall until her breathing evened out. Only then did my hands start to shake. Downstairs, laughter floated up the staircase. Someone turned the music louder. Christmas carols drifted through the vents, cheerful and cruel at the same time. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall, replaying my dad's words again and again, trying to find the version of them that hurt less. There wasn't one. It wasn't the first time they'd made it clear I was overstaying my welcome. It was just the first time they'd said it without pretending to care how it landed. When my marriage fell apart the year before, I'd come back to my parents' house with a suitcase, a newborn, and the quiet hope that family meant safety. I told myself it would only be for a few months. Time to get back on my feet. Time to adjust to being a single mother. I believed them when they said they were happy to help. But help, I learned quickly, came with conditions. I wasn't treated like a daughter. I wasn't treated like a guest. I was treated like a solution. A financial one. An emotional one. A convenient one. At first, it was small things. My mom asked if I could cover groceries since I was eating there too. It seemed reasonable. Then utilities, because my daughter and I were home during the day. Then the internet bill, because I worked remotely sometimes and used it the most. My name started appearing on envelopes left deliberately on the counter, circled in pen, waiting for me. Every payment was framed as temporary. Just this once. Until things evened out. Until my dad's hours stabilized. Until inflation slowed down. There was always a reason. There was never an end. I worked full-time, balancing spreadsheets and appointment schedules while pumping breast milk in a bathroom stall. I skipped lunches. I picked up extra shifts. I told myself it was worth it because my daughter had a roof over her head and grandparents who loved her. Or at least loved the idea of her. But love shouldn't feel like debt. The comments started slipping in quietly. My mom mentioning how tired she was from babysitting, even though she reminded me constantly how lucky I was to have her help. My dad making jokes about how expensive kids were while glancing pointedly at me. My brother rolling his eyes when I asked if anyone could watch my daughter for 10 minutes so I could shower. I learned to anticipate their moods, to clean before being asked, to apologize preemptively, to make myself useful. And still, it wasn't enough. That night, after everyone went to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen holding a slice of pie I didn't want. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My dad's words echoed in my head, stripped of the holiday noise. We've given you enough. I set the plate down untouched and leaned against the counter, closing my eyes. Something inside me hardened, not into anger, but into clarity. I wasn't welcome. I hadn't been for a long time. Christmas dinner had just made it official. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured my daughter growing up in a house where her mother was tolerated at best. I imagined her absorbing the same unspoken rules I had. Be quiet. Be grateful. Don't expect too much. Before sunrise, I made a decision. I packed quietly, moving through the house like I didn't exist. I filled one suitcase with clothes, diapers, bottles, and my daughter's favorite blanket. I left behind things I'd paid for. Furniture, toys, decorations. None of it mattered. When I carried my daughter downstairs, my mom was already awake, standing in the kitchen in her robe, coffee in hand. She frowned when she saw the bag. "Where are you going?" she asked. I met her eyes, surprised by how calm I felt. "You said you were tired of me," I replied. "So I'm fixing that." Her face tightened. My dad appeared in the hallway seconds later, anger flashing across his features. He started saying my name, his voice sharp, authoritative, the way it always was when I didn't fall in line. I didn't stop. I didn't explain. I opened the front door and stepped into the cold morning air. The rain soaked through my shoes almost immediately as I strapped my daughter into the car. The house behind me stayed dark. No one followed. No one told me to come back. As I drove away, I realized something that hurt almost as much as it healed. They meant it. The road was slick with rain, the kind that blurred headlights into long, trembling lines of white and red. My daughter slept in her car seat, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt steadier than my own heartbeat. I kept both hands on the steering wheel, knuckles tight, afraid that if I loosened my grip even a little, everything would unravel. I didn't have a destination. I just knew I couldn't go back. The gas gauge dipped lower with every mile, the warning light flickering on like an accusation. I pulled into a small gas station just outside town, parking near the back where the light barely reached. When I turned the engine off, the silence was overwhelming. Rain drummed against the roof, loud and relentless. I checked my bank balance. $718. That number stared back at me, unblinking. Rent, food, diapers, gas. Everything I needed to survive now fit into that fragile sum. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and cried quietly, the kind of cry that comes from exhaustion more than despair. My shoulders shook, but I didn't make a sound. I didn't want to wake my daughter. 5 minutes later, I wiped my face and inhaled deeply. Panic wouldn't change the numbers. Fear wouldn't feed my child. I started thinking practically, the way I always had when things fell apart. I scrolled through my contacts, past names I hadn't spoken to in years, past family members who suddenly felt like strangers. I stopped on Rachel, a coworker who once mentioned her cousin owned a few rental units. We weren't close. We weren't friends outside of work. But she'd smiled at me when she said it, like she meant it as an offer, not a boast. I typed the message 3 times before sending it. Hey, I know this is last minute, but you mentioned your cousin rents apartments. Do you know if anything is available? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding with every passing second. When my phone buzzed less than 10 minutes later, I nearly dropped it. 1 bedroom. Upstairs. Available immediately. No deposit if I could pay the first 2 months up front. I didn't ask for photos. I didn't ask about the neighborhood. I said yes. By evening, we were there. The apartment was small and smelled faintly of fresh paint. The floors were bare, the walls empty and echoing. There was no furniture, no curtains, but it was clean. It was quiet. It was ours. I laid my daughter on a blanket pulled from the trunk and sat beside her on the floor, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building settling around us. That night, I slept in my coat, my back against the wall, waking at every creak and footstep, my body on constant alert. Morning light streamed through the thin blinds, dust motes dancing in the air. My daughter woke up smiling, like she thought the empty room was some kind of adventure. Her resilience broke my heart and healed it all at once. I bought an air mattress, paper plates, and a cheap pack of diapers. That was all I could afford. I inflated the mattress by hand until my arms burned, then lay back and stared at the ceiling, letting myself feel proud for exactly 60 seconds. Then reality pressed back in. I showed up to work wearing the same clothes twice and smiled like nothing was wrong. I answered emails, scheduled appointments, nodded in meetings. No one asked questions. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they did and didn't want to know. The messages started a few days later. First my mom. You can't just leave like that. Then my dad. You need to grow up and face your responsibilities. They spoke as if I'd abandoned them, as if I was the one who'd walked out without warning. When they said they missed my daughter, I noticed they never said they missed me. I tried to explain once. I typed out everything I'd swallowed for months, my fingers shaking as I hit send. The response came quickly. "You're being dramatic. It was just a joke." I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I blocked his number. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. My mom started showing up at my workplace, lingering in the lobby, asking the receptionist for me with a practiced look of concern. I hid in the supply closet once, my breath shallow, my phone vibrating in my pocket. After that, I stopped checking my mailbox. I lived with a constant knot of anxiety in my chest, waiting for the next intrusion. I thought leaving would bring peace. Instead, it brought distance, and distance made them louder. Then one afternoon, standing in line at the grocery store with a cart full of discounted food and store-brand formula, something unexpected happened. A man behind me tapped my shoulder. "Hey," he said gently. "Did you drop this?" He held out a pacifier. It wasn't mine, but I took it anyway, smiling out of habit, unaware that in that ordinary moment, my life was about to change. I didn't correct him about the pacifier. I just smiled, murmured thank you, and turned back to the conveyor belt as the cashier began scanning my groceries. My daughter gnawed on the corner of an empty snack wrapper, perfectly content, while my chest tightened with every beep of the register. I was already calculating what I could put back if the total climbed too high. Behind me, the man didn't hover. He didn't push conversation. When the cashier announced the total, I swallowed and reached for my card, bracing myself. "Oh," the cashier said, pausing. "It's already been paid." I blinked. "I'm sorry." She nodded toward the end of the register. "That gentleman covered it." I turned just in time to see him lifting a hand in a small, almost embarrassed wave. "Merry Christmas," he said, like he just held the door open instead of paying for a cart of groceries I hadn't been sure I could afford. Panic hit before gratitude. I grabbed the bags and hurried after him, my daughter bouncing against my hip. "You didn't have to do that," I said, my voice cracking. "I can pay you back." He shook his head, still calm. "You're good. Take care." And then he was gone. I stood in the cold parking lot, holding grocery bags that felt heavier than they should have, blinking back tears I hadn't planned on shedding. No one had helped me like that in months. Not without keeping score. I didn't expect to see him again. But 2 weeks later, there he was, reaching for a carton of milk in the same store. This time, I spoke first. "Pacifier guy," I said before I could stop myself. He laughed softly. "Guilty." His name was Ryan. He asked how old my daughter was. He didn't ask why I looked tired or why I counted change so carefully. We talked about nothing important. The weather. The way winter seemed endless. The ridiculous price of diapers. When he asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime, just coffee, baby welcome, no pressure, I surprised myself by saying yes. Coffee turned into conversation. Conversation turned into familiarity. Ryan never pushed. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered small things, like how I hated loud ticking clocks and how my daughter refused to nap unless someone hummed to her. He didn't treat me like I was fragile or broken. After a month, I let him meet my daughter properly. He showed up with a small stuffed elephant and her favorite baby puffs. She took to him instantly, grabbing his finger like she'd already decided he was safe. Life didn't suddenly become easy, but it became lighter. Then one evening, everything tightened again. I came home from work to see my parents' car parked outside my building. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might be sick. My mom rushed toward me, arms open, face full of rehearsed concern. "We were so worried," she said. "You overreacted." My dad stood back, arms crossed, his expression sharp. "We just want to talk." My daughter started crying, sensing the tension. My hands shook as I held her closer. "You need to leave," I said, my voice unsteady. My dad scoffed. "Don't be disrespectful." That was when Ryan pulled into the lot. He took one look at my face and walked over, calm and deliberate. "She doesn't want to talk," he said evenly. "You need to go." For the first time in my life, my father hesitated. Then they left. Later that night, sitting on my apartment floor while my daughter slept, Ryan told me the truth. He'd co-founded a tech company years ago. Sold his share. Lived simply by choice. He didn't offer to rescue me. He offered support, boundaries, safety. A few days later, a lawyer's letter arrived from my parents, listing everything they claimed I owed them. Rent, utilities, groceries, things I'd already paid for. I panicked. Ryan didn't. Within 48 hours, the claim disappeared. Then my daughter's old stuffed rabbit arrived in the mail. No return address. My hands shook as I held it. Ryan didn't hesitate. "You're not staying here another night," he said quietly. We left 2 days later, not in a rush, not in panic, but with a calm determination that felt unfamiliar and strangely empowering. Ryan handled the logistics quietly, efficiently, like someone who'd learned long ago that chaos didn't deserve an audience. Movers arrived early that morning, their voices low and professional as they packed my small apartment into boxes labeled with black marker. I watched from the doorway, my daughter balanced on my hip, feeling a surprising lack of sadness. That place had kept us safe, but it had never been home. I pulled my daughter out of daycare myself, smiling tightly as the director wished us luck and told me to send pictures. I didn't explain. I didn't owe anyone my story anymore. By noon, the apartment was empty. No air mattress. No paper plates. No echo of the nights I'd lain awake listening for footsteps that never came. I stood in the doorway one last time, waiting to feel grief. What I felt instead was relief. Ryan asked me to stay in the car while he made one final stop alone. I didn't ask where he was going. I already knew. When he came back, his expression was neutral, resolved. "I told them this is final," he said as he started the engine. "They're not to contact you again." I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to hear what he said or how much it cost. For the first time, someone had drawn a line for me without asking me to justify why it was necessary. When we landed, the air felt different. Warmer. Softer. Like it wasn't holding its breath. Ryan's place wasn't extravagant. No towering gates or sweeping staircases. Just a quiet home tucked away from the noise, already baby-proofed in a way that made my chest tighten. He showed me my room. My daughter's room. He didn't assume anything beyond that. That first night, I slept through until morning. No jolting awake. No phantom vibrations from my phone. No fear waiting outside the door. Weeks passed. Then months. Life didn't become perfect. It became stable. I found remote work that paid consistently. I started saving for the first time in years. My daughter slept better. She laughed more. She stopped startling at raised voices. Ryan stayed exactly who he'd always been. Present. Kind. Steady. He cooked dinner, helped with bedtime, built towers on the living room floor just to let my daughter knock them down again and again. He never rushed me. Never framed himself as a savior. He treated me like an equal who'd survived something hard and deserved peace. 6 months after we moved, I came home from the grocery store to find him sitting at the table with a folder open in front of him. For one sharp second, my chest tightened, old fear flaring instinctively. Then he smiled. "I forgot to tell you," he said casually. "I added your name to the deed." I stared at him, words stuck in my throat. "Ryan, you didn't have to." "I wanted you to feel secure," he interrupted gently. "This is your home too." Something settled deep in my bones at that moment. Not excitement. Not disbelief. Safety. That night, after my daughter fell asleep, I realized something else. The silence from my parents no longer felt threatening. It felt finished. We went to the beach the following weekend. My daughter ran straight into the waves, shrieking with joy, fearless in a way I'd never been allowed to be. Ryan chased after her, lifting her into the air while she laughed. I watched them from the sand, the sun warm on my skin, and felt the final piece click into place. The woman who stayed quiet to survive, who paid for scraps of approval, who mistook endurance for love, she was gone. In her place stood someone who knew exactly what she deserved. The strange thing about peace is how quiet it arrives. There was no dramatic announcement, no single moment where I woke up and realized everything was finally okay. It settled in slowly, in the space where fear used to live. In mornings that began without dread. In nights where my phone stayed silent, not buzzing with guilt disguised as concern. I stopped checking the parking lot before leaving my apartment. I stopped flinching when unfamiliar cars passed too slowly. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head for boundaries I no longer felt the need to justify. My body learned what my mind already knew. We were safe. Ryan never asked me to confront my parents. He never suggested closure talks or final conversations. He understood something instinctively that had taken me years to learn. Closure doesn't come from the people who hurt you. It comes from deciding they no longer get access to your life. I thought about my father sometimes, usually in quiet moments when my daughter was asleep and the house was still. I replayed that Christmas dinner in my head, his voice calm and final. "We've given you enough." For a long time, those words had echoed like a verdict on my worth. Now I heard them differently. They said nothing about me. They said everything about him. I realized how strange it was that the people who had taken the most from me were the ones who accused me of taking too much. My money, my time, my energy, my silence. They had called it help. They had called it family. But real family doesn't keep a ledger. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork, I found a receipt from that year I lived in their house. Utility bills, grocery payments, transfers marked rent in my own handwriting. I stared at the stack for a long time, then fed every page into the shredder. I didn't need proof anymore. I didn't need validation. I was done collecting evidence for a case I'd already won. My daughter grew fast. Too fast. She learned to say mine and no with unapologetic confidence. When she cried, she was comforted, not scolded. When she made a mess, we laughed instead of sighing. I watched her move through the world without shrinking, and I understood that leaving that house had been the most important decision I'd ever made, for both of us. Ryan never tried to replace anything we'd lost. He didn't fill the space my parents left behind. He helped me build something entirely new. Something honest. Something steady. Love without conditions. Support without strings. A home without fear. Sometimes people ask about my family, where they are, why they aren't around. I don't tell the whole story. I don't owe it to anyone. I simply say, we're not in contact. And that sentence, once heavy with shame, now feels light. Last Christmas, we didn't host a dinner. We stayed in. Ryan cooked while I wrapped gifts on the living room floor. My daughter toddled around in mismatched pajamas, humming to herself. There were no speeches, no verdicts, no careful calculations of who owed what to whom. Just warmth, just laughter, just peace. At one point, Ryan caught my eye across the room and smiled. Not the proud kind, not the possessive kind. Just the kind that says, I'm here. I thought about the woman I had been the Christmas before, sitting at the end of the table, holding her breath, believing love was something you earned by enduring discomfort. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her what I know now. You are not too much. You were just in the wrong place. That Christmas dinner didn't end my family. It freed me from a version of family that required me to disappear to belong. Walking away wasn't failure. It was survival. It was self-respect. It was choosing a future where my daughter would never learn to confuse silence with love. Some people lose everything and call it tragedy. I lost the illusion that I was wanted where I was tolerated. And in exchange, I gained something far better. A life where I am chosen. A home where I am safe. And a peace I will never give back.